back again. I'm just waiting for Hedley to join in, but we should be ready soon. Hi guys. Just waiting for Hedley to join in. So I realised that my connection last week was pretty bad, so hopefully this week it's better. But yeah, we should be started soon. I know he's just getting ready and just finishing up some notes. So it should be okay. Hi.
Hello?
Hi, hold on, I've got this really high for some reason. There we go.
Not
How you doing? How you doing?
too bad, thanks. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. Okay, so introduce yourself. I'm just putting the volume on my speakers. Um, yeah, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Hedley, and I'm basically a co-founder of Smokey Settings. So we sent you guys some masks. So there was a picture of you guys with the mask, the logo on the front, so that came from us. And basically what Smokey Settings is like an events company. So we put on music events, doing a bit of blogging, and the theme is basically to do with French music, UK music, the fact that they're quite local and we've got a big community here, sort of bridging the gap culturally as well.
Okay, sounds good. Cool. So today we're going to talk about what his job is, what Hedley does for a career, Smokey Settings briefly, and we're going to talk about his Jamaican heritage and his Scottish surname. And we're also going to discuss the African Caribbean divide in the UK if we've got time. Don't know how much this, we've got quite a lot of information for you guys, so I don't know how long we'll go on. But yeah, so um, as Smoky Settings was set up this year, how have you guys bounced back from obviously COVID-19 and how have you guys kind of handled that?
Well, it was actually set up last year. So me and my business partner, who's based in Paris, set it up towards the back end of last year. The idea was really actually to put on an event because I think with the diversity in London ethnically, there's a lot of different events going on. There's a lot of different niches that have actually become quite popular. And so the idea is that another niche that we wanted to kind of build up was the fact that sort of the French have got their own language, their own music, obviously. It's quite really popular over there, but there aren't many places doing events here. So we started off doing that. The idea was to put on an event, but in order to kind of get an audience on both sides of the channel, we needed to set up some blogging. So we started doing that toward the back end of last year. But the real sort of investment into the business and setting up the first event and things like that was this year, and obviously was heavily impacted by COVID as well.
Because you guys were meant to have an event in April and that was going to be like your first thing, and obviously lockdown started in March. So yeah, how did
Mm.
that kind of like hit you guys? How did that affect you?
Um, it had a big effect, really. Had a big impact, and I think that's the same with every business. It was one of those things outside of your control. Nobody saw it coming. I remember at the time talking about there's been SARS and pig flu and bird flu and all these different things. And you think, all right, it's on the news, but it's not actually going to come right to our doorstep and actually change our way of living and things we can do. And yeah, when it came, we had to cancel our event. Obviously, made an investment into it. That's quite difficult. But and yeah, I think the event, the impact is still there. So we've had to change about a lot of the ways that we're doing things at the moment to sort of keep the venture going.
Okay. You also work in finance. So in the finance world, what have you noticed about the differences of money behavior in like different communities and stuff?
It's an interesting one because the thing is, it's not been that long. When you're looking at things like financial impacts, economic impacts of things, you normally need quite a large amount of time to actually see what what the impacts are going to be. So a lot of the things that may happen as a result of this lockdown, the pandemic, etc., probably aren't really gonna. You're not really necessarily going to see that stuff until maybe later in the year, next year, year after, etc. So,
Mm-hmm.
and for people who don't know, my day job is I'm a financial planner. So, I help people out with things like investments, pension, savings, tax, things like that. I've not seen a massive change in their behavior. And then one of the reasons is because I look after high net worth people. Um, and maybe, as I say, because they've got cash reserves and things like that, there isn't that much of a difference in their behavior. But, I mean, have you seen many differences or any changes since the
Um,
pandemic hit?
I think because I've not been out spending, it's kind of made me look at my bank and be like, I want to keep this money inside. And you've not had the option to just do like day-to-day things or whatever. So like every time I get paid, I notice that like I'll put the majority of it into my savings once I've paid all my bills, and I'm just like I don't want to touch it. I don't want to do anything. So yeah, it's kind of made me more cautious, and it's made me realize how much I was spending in normal life and like my spending behavior before that. So it's maybe kind of like knuckle down and actually try and like be cautious of it a little bit more.
Did you feel like you're spending like a lot less money,
Yeah,
since
like
we've
a
been?
lot less. Like it was at a point where like I could probably go for like £200-300 a week just
Oh,
on
yeah.
anything. Yeah. So like it's at a point now I'm like looking at it and I'm like, wow, like what was I doing with all the money and what was I playing at basically?
Yeah. I mean, you know what it's like in London in terms of how expensive it is here, right?
Hmm.
What would you
Yeah.
say it's like in comparison, say, where you are in Scotland compared to
Um
say London prices? Like,
Scotland's
what's the
very cheap. I think well if you're here it doesn't seem cheap. Like Edinburgh doesn't seem cheap compared to like other places in Scotland. But if you do because I am in both places from back London and Scotland, I think when I come back here I'm very much like, oh I don't have to spend that much and it's a relief. But like when I go down south it's one of those things of like when you go into a bar and it's like £10 for a shot and I'm like, what? Like I'm not paying that. So it's one of those things of like you can notice a big difference, but it's I think if you look into companies and stuff, you can see like even big companies that have branches both up north and down south, the pay gap is very much explaining as to like how much this like the cost of living and how much people have to spend living down south.
Okay, okay. So yeah, I guess that's quite an obvious change, isn't it? There's less things to spend money on because less places are open. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so people are saving money. I know some people that do a lot of online shopping and that kind of stuff, but yeah, these are very sort of small and short-term types of impacts. It'll be interesting to see what the long-term impact is going to be.
Yeah,
Particularly after the second wave and another lockdown.
yeah. In terms of like racial issues, what is your viewpoint on the socio-economic factors which affect the Black community?
So
Just coming from like a financial background, what is your opinion?
financial background.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so I guess demographic-wise, a lot of my clients are based in the city of London, so they're sort of lawyers, bankers, people doing the kind of high-flying jobs. Ethnically, a lot of them tend to be white. Some of them will be from other ethnic backgrounds, but you don't see a massive amount of black people there. Um, you
Yeah.
know, um, and so me growing up in a very sort of working class background, ethnic minority background, I feel like I have noticed some differences in terms of spending habits,
Mm-hmm.
what they do with their money, types of investments that they're interested in, and overall attitude and perhaps even discipline when it comes to when it comes to their money. I
Yeah.
think that there is a difference. I feel like black people actually kind of stand out a little bit. You know.
Mm-hmm. Because one of those things, I feel the Black community is very flashy and it's always like, what's the next brand? What's the next trend? What's the next thing? So, yeah, you can pretty much see that within our spending habits that we are the ones that instead of putting money into like investments and stuff, it's like I'd rather put it into Gucci, I'd rather put it into certain kind of things just for that drip mentality. So,
Yeah,
do
it
you
seems like
think
we're
you've
almost
noticed
known
that?
for.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what materialism in the black community is definitely a thing. I guess some people might see it as an elephant in the room. Some people will just go out and point it out, but I think whether consciously or subconsciously, I think we're all aware of the fact that what's seen as black culture these days is quite closely linked with materialism. You could even argue financial irresponsibility. But at the same time, I think it's important to make the distinction between the relationship between, say, an ethnic group and a behavioural pattern like, spending, maybe being careless with their money, and also relating it to social classes. When I don't know if that's the kind of question you're asking, being more specific, working class people, even if they're not black, will sometimes tend to be more materialistic and a bit more short term with their attitude towards money. People higher up the chain maybe don't have such immediate problems like me. They might also feel less of a need to prove themselves. So again, spending on material things isn't such a big thing, so they can think a bit more long term. So what I'm saying is, if you've noticed that trend as well between black people and materialism, is that because black culture, or is that because we generally tend to be working class, or is it a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both, I think, personally, because it's one of those things of, yes, we mainly tend to be working class and we have to then work out of that class strata or whatever. But there's also the fact of, even when you go back home, it's very much of like, you're celebrated for having like the best dresses and the best outfits and just looking the best, and you're always glorified for that. So yeah, I think both of them have an impact.
Definitely. So I think, to further sort of delve into it, I think a good question to ask is, what's actually the link between black people, let's say outside of Africa, and let's say UK, really, black people and being working class. It doesn't seem like there's much of a black middle class. So if you assume that most black people are working class, then obviously you could see that could be a reason why there's a link. I think the question I would ask is, why are so many black people basically working class?
Yeah. And I think that's to do with like how we get like situated and how the government kind of like puts us into places when we come to this country. And it's one of those things of like, when we say socio-economic, it is a fact of the social affects the economic side, and they're very correlated.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I looked at, there was somebody actually told me statistics. I didn't look it up myself, but a lot of people from, say, African or Caribbean background have basically, in the UK, tend to work lower paid jobs. Needless to say, you earn less money. Needless to say that it's a more stressful environment. What impact does that have on, let's say, a family? What impact does that have on children? What social behaviours, does that sort of produce? And, is it an insecurity thing? There are a lot of questions that you could go on to, but just sort of relating it back to what I see, in my job, I think that there is certainly a lack of awareness and interest in things like long-term planning, saving into a pension, making investments into stock shares, anything that, actually has a potential upward trajectory rather than its value disappearing the moment that it comes off the shelf. I think it's definitely something that we need to address. And I think it's, in my personal circle, I try to spend as much effort as I can trying to help people understand that there are more positive things that you can do with the money that you work hard to bring in than just spend it on something to show off to your mates.
Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Right, let's go on to the biggest topic we have so far. You're Jamaican and you have a Scottish surname, so it's one of those things of growing up in the UK, we were just made oblivious to slavery, and no one really the governments didn't want to teach us about it and they didn't want to say anything about it. So it's one of those things of how do you feel knowing that your surname is linked to UK slavery?
It's an interesting question. I mean, it's not something I think about a lot, to be honest. It's not like my name is my name, what I mean? It's just it's all I know. But I do remember that point where I sort of had it roughly explained to me, when my parents sort of said to me, well, this is the surname you have, and it's from Scotland, and the reason why it's from Scotland, and explained a bit, or as much as they probably knew about what slavery is, and maybe the difference between someone like me and somebody who, is actually has a direct link to Africa.
Hmm. Okay. Um, Being from Jamaica, most people think that your heritage is either Windrush or slavery. So obviously slavery is linked to you, but have you got any ties with the Windrush generation?
Yeah, I do. So that's kind of my lineage here. So my grandparents came over in the 60s. Don't ask me what year. It's either 50s or 60s.
Hmm.
Obviously born back in the Caribbean. And my parents were born here. And obviously, I was born here as well. But that's where my lineage goes. Further than my grandparents, it's actually back in the Caribbean.
Yeah. Um, Hold on, let me just turn the page. So when we were researching your name, we actually came across the guy that owned your family, and we came across his plantation and everything else like that. And what we did find is that there is a place in Scotland that is still open, that is linked to your tie, and it's linked to your surname, linked to your heritage, and it's now used as a tourist attraction. Which, for everyone watching, is Abbotsford House. So that's the link that you have to that. Yeah. What did you think when you were doing the research? Like, how did you find that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Because obviously with everything that's been going on since the George Floyd murder,
Hmm.
and it's really sort of a real topic at the moment. And I found it really interesting seeing people talking about their experiences, being a black person, some of the different types of racism that they've experienced, and it's been quite emotional for a lot of people. Me personally, I was kind of like, I feel like I've come to terms with a lot of those things a long time ago, right? So it wasn't very emotional for me.
Yeah.
But when I found that out, and then I was actually, you could find out information about where the plantation was, where they were holding my ancestors, and things like that.
Hmm.
I wouldn't say it was emotional, but it really made it real.
Yeah. Because
And
that was one
it's
of the
hard
things
to,
that we were saying. We were like, it was as we were discussing it, it was a bit like, oh my God, it's like it's mad. And it's one of those things that when I searched it on maps, it's literally an hour away from where I am, and I'm like, it's at my fingertips. Like I could go there so easily, and like even if you were to be in Scotland, you could go and visit the place that your ancestors built because even within this house, the like wood and the infrastructure of the building was shipped from Jamaica. So your ancestors literally slaved the house and they built the foundations of it.
yeah, from what I read, I can't remember the guy's name. So Walter something, I can't remember what the guy's name was, but it was basically a gift to him
Hmm.
from the guy who owned the slave plantation where my ancestors were. And the materials that were basically used to supply, that were used to obviously build it, came from his slave plantation, which meant it was basically my ancestors who, obviously working under horrible conditions, um, you know, produced it.
It's actually mad. I think the more I think about it, the more I'm like, that's crazy because it is literally like I don't think when I was researching, I didn't expect to find it, and I didn't expect to find such a like valid. Well, it's not valid, but such an obvious link to your surname and to your heritage and ancestors. But once we found it, I was a bit like, oh, like it's kind of like you don't know what to say, but you do at the same time. Do you know what I mean? Like you're shocked, but you're not shocked because we know slavery exists and we know that it went on. But I was just so shocked that it was the place is a tourist attraction. I think that's what shocks me more is the fact that now they're generating profit off people going to see it just thinking it's a beautiful castle and whatever da da da. But it's not. It's something that is linked so deeply to slavery. And you're in the UK, so it's on your back.
Absolutely, it's like it's presented as this beautiful thing, but underneath it, it's like the history behind it actually isn't so beautiful if you know it, but it does look nice.
Hmm.
But I mean, yeah, there's so many different layers to sort of what I was feeling because I was kind of thinking, about what everybody's been through, and also it was kind of like, my friends who are maybe say directly from Africa, they can actually trace their lineage.
Hmm.
Whereas me, I've met people that have said like, "What's your African name?" And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not going to know anything about anything further than my grandparents. I probably could find out a little bit further, but not more, much further. But when you're actually looking at, you're seeing who the slave plantation owner is, you're seeing exactly where it was, Melrose Estate in Manchester in Jamaica. Like when you actually see where it is and you can see where your people are held, it does bring it home, and then it actually raises a lot more questions. Where did they come from? What did they
Hmm.
experience? what else went down, you know?
So the one thing that I found on the slave owner was that he had two plantations. One was called Mount Nelson, and he on that plantation had over 700 slaves during the duration of time he owned it. And then there was the other one, which was Melrose, which Melrose is a Scottish name. Everyone knows, like, there's so many links to Melrose, but he had a plantation called Melrose where he had over 500 slaves. So that's over 1,000 people that he's bought and paid for. And then when he passed, his ancestors, that they gained that. So you guys were still partly owned by like his like children and whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's like any kind of asset, you know. If somebody owns a house and, you know, jewelry and stuff like that, they die,
Hmm.
you know, um, they inherit it. And slaves were basically an asset, you know. They weren't classed as humans. They didn't have human rights. They were, you know, they were basically assets and very valuable ones
Yeah.
because, you know, my surname is relatively unusual, which means that you imagine that the person who owned, you know, my ancestors, probably all the people, they probably weren't the biggest clan.
Hmm.
But still, what, you know, over 1,000 slaves, how much they earned from that. But when you think about the ones that, you know, the more common surnames, the bigger slave owners, how many people did they own? And, you know,
Yeah. It's crazy. And like I was looking into the house and I kind of find out like I was trying to find out information on it and the way he's made Abbotsford House is a replica of the plantation house he had in Jamaica. And it's got the same design inside. It's got materials transferred from Jamaica and even just the indoor like the inside layout and how he's got like a fort around his house and like gardens around it is you could probably go to Jamaica and probably see the same place.
not
But
much
it's
sign of remorse,
just in
is
Scotland.
there? Just
Pardon?
you know, not much remorse for this abomination, is it? You
Do you know
know?
what I mean? Like they'd literally just say, let's take everything they had here and put in Scotland and let's be proud of it and have it as a tourist attraction in Scotland and be like, oh, look at
Yeah,
this grand castle. Because I'm like, in my head, I'm like, people get married there. People like, there'll be so many
yeah.
different services held that people don't
Not the
actually
Caribbean.
realize it's a slave house. No, the one in the Scottish one. And I'm like, you are not like repping down your Caribbean people that built this house or anything, which is us. It actually, the whole situation baffles me.
Yeah. But, you know, and this is something, and I know you did quite a lot of research, maybe something worth going into, is that from their perspective, if you consider that the slaves weren't considered as people, they were just material things, you know, things that they didn't actually care about,
Hmm.
and everything that they built and achieved, to them it was a sense of pride. Of course
Yeah.
they were happy. They wanted to replicate this house that produced all this income, that supplied all this wealth to this country. Of course you want to rebuild it. You know, if it was anything other than human beings, you know, you'd be proud of that accomplishment. So, not playing devil's advocate, but I imagine that's probably where their minds were. You know, not to say that they weren't
Yeah.
a bunch of, you know.
Because it's like a common thing that when like African people here, when they build houses back home, they will build the replica of the house they've got here. And that's quite a common thing. So, like, I understand that point, but just because it's linked to slavery, I'm a bit like, nah, that's not okay. Like, it's not like we're taking things out of our houses here and putting them in the UK. Like, we're not taking the wood from like the trees outside or something and like making white people go and build it to go and build our homes back home in Africa. Like, we're just taking the standard architectural design, whereas that was just a fact of I want to have the same kind of space as my plantation. If I can get the slaves here, they'll work here, and that was the
But
kind
I
of
mean,
idea behind it.
yeah, exactly. And think about it, right? So, you know, the person that owned my ancestors, as I say, those people were, you know, probably the biggest slave owners. What about the ones, you know, what other stuff, you know, what other sort of monuments are you walking past that are built off the back of more common or larger slave owners? You know, what other stuff? And what I'm leading to is, what are they teaching you? Why were we only aware of this now?
Yeah,
You know?
and that's like
Uh,
one of the big things in Edinburgh is that our like one of our biggest universities, Edinburgh University, is pretty much a slave shrine, and a lot of the buildings that are owned within this university have like some of them have kind of like statue like do you know when you can mold into buildings? They have like statue moldings, they have names of slave masters, and even like we had a protest a couple of weeks ago for there's this big like little garden thing in the city centre, and it's got this that someone Dundas. I know his surname's Dundas, but it was the guy that owned Joseph Knight, who is one of the first slave to come to Scotland. So we had a protest about the statue that's in the middle of the city centre and stuff. And yeah, I think now this is all coming out. A lot of Scottish people have been exposed to how much of their everyday life is linked back to slavery. And I don't think people like. I don't know how people are. taking in that information. Because obviously on the black side and the African and Caribbean side, we're aware of slavery anyway. We know it and like whatever. But I feel like when it comes to like the white counter side, they're a bit like it is the first time they're hearing of this stuff, and it's a shock to them. And they like, what do they do?
And how do they take it? Because, I wouldn't say there is potentially a conflict of interest there, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
Because on one hand, you're outraged by it, on the other hand, your whole, a large part of your civilization, it's hard to quantify how much, but my suspicion, especially when you've done the research that you've done, is just a lot more than what actually is revealed to us of the civilization, of the infrastructure and the wealth that Scotland has came off the back of that. And what I basically mean is that you could be having a much, much significantly lower standard of living if those atrocities didn't happen. And if you actually paid back what you owe. So, who's not black, a native Scot, good person, morally, it's a bit of a conundrum, isn't
it? Yeah. One of the like clips that I found when I was researching everything, which I am gonna link for the followers to watch it because it was really, really informational. It's basically like a lesson on Scottish slavery, but slavery. The biggest thing that I was shocked about when I was watching this video was that slavery is the reason that Scotland and England joined to make Great Britain. So if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have been the UK. We would have always just been Scotland and England and whatever other like countries there are. But that was the biggest thing. Scotland wanted to get in on colonization, but then when they tried, they failed and lost all their wealth. So England had to back them out, and then they made Great Britain. And then once Great Britain was established, Scotland gained the colonies that Great Britain had, and then went out and started venturing on their slavery trail. And it's one of those things of like, as a person living in Scotland, I think that there's a part of me that's looking at it in a sense of just so we could have money and finances. And I get that countries need to be economized and everything like that, but just so we could have that, we went and did the worst thing. And Scottish people did like the worst thing they could do. Literally, the worst thing they could do was join forces with another country just to be like, I want to own people. I want to have plantations that you have plantations. I want to do this abuse that you're doing, and da 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 da.
Yeah, very interesting, isn't it? Because I don't know if it was like literally the only reason, but I think from my understanding is obviously that Scotland weren't involved. I think the biggest the people that were most involved in slavery at the time, I think, were places like Portugal and Spain and England. And Scotland felt like they were missing out on the action. And you can imagine if with all the wealth that those countries are accumulating, the advances that they're making, the potential threat they might even become, Scotland might have thought, well, actually, we need to increase our power. You see this stuff happening today, really, don't you? People trying to advance themselves and, all sort of in these races. Scotland and, colonise somewhere fell, and they're economically very, very vulnerable. And they sort of joined up with the UK. And from there, they got heavily, heavily involved in the slave trade and made an absolute fortune.
I know, like Scotland's wealth, and that's one of the things that the video really does show is that Scotland gained so much off the back of slavery. Like our wealth got rescued by it, like essentially. So it was one of those things of because England bailed us out, it was kind of like Scots felt like they had to do more work and they had to do so much more to feel like they're working for what they were getting and working, like actually doing the actions they had to do, which then led to Scotland capturing the slaves and actually having like, well, I want to call them a jail because they were essentially jails or trap houses or whatever, but they would have the houses where they would capture people from the villages and the towns, put them in the house was on the coast, and then they would just wait for the boat to come and they'd put them on the boat. And even that is, I think once you're taking someone, that's the worst act because you're taking someone from their family, taking someone from what they know, and then you're like, I'm going to hold you in these really poor conditions for maybe 1 to 2 weeks, and then when a boat comes, it's going to be even worse. You might die on the boat, but hey ho, I'm getting money.
While we're talking, I'm sitting there thinking, how do they capture them? Because on one hand, I was like, well, there would be so many more Africans. How do they do it? I know some people, there's this sort of, claim that they were sold by other Africans. But then also, one of the things that they traded and that Scots actually brought over was guns, copper, things like that. So when you think about it, the Africans haven't got guns. the Scots come in, shoot a couple, and say, look, come with us, or we'll shoot you too. It's legal, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah, and it's like it's just a real exploitation, and it just shows how much they exploited what the people needed in Africa, and then being like, but because we're going to give you this, we're going to take 10 people, or however many people are going to take from that one village or town. Um, which yeah, it's quite scary. Like it's a mad way to think of it. And another thing that I found out there was that out of all the ships that traveled from Africa to the Caribbean or America, 1 in 5 captains of the ships was a Scottish person. No one else, but 1 in 5 was a Scottish person, and that's such a small but high statistic.
Yeah,
If
and I
that
mean, they had a lot of.
makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, it does make sense, and this is something I did look into a bit because one of the things I've heard in a lot of different areas of history, things like Second World War and lots of different other parts of history, is I've always heard people make reference to the fact that Scots are actually very smart people. They're quite industrious. They're intelligent and organised people. So when you look at how they got involved in slavery, the slave trade once they linked up with England, it was very sort of setting up infrastructure, setting up the ports, obviously bringing materials, which I guess everybody was doing. But they had doctors, clerks doing administration, as you say, captains on ships and things like that. And they were obviously very, very sort of effective at what they did. And it obviously translated to the overall economy in Scotland growing, not necessarily just materials coming in or money coming in, but the overall there was so many jobs that came off the back of this industry. Effectively, is what it was really, wasn't it? It was an industry.
Yeah, and that's what's mad about it, is the fact that like considering Scots like only got in it because the English were in on it, they did so much and they had such an effect on it. And I think that's what's the confused. It's not confusing, but I think that's what's the most shocking part about it is like you wouldn't have been able if England said no to joining forces, Scotland wouldn't have been able to do it. But then once we got involved, we were heavily involved, and it was such a big impact.
Which means the Scots brought something to the table. You know how life works. You don't just turn up and go, right, I want to get involved, bring you off a piece of the cake. You bring something to the table. And I think the Scots definitely brought something to the table because, certainly in Jamaica, the roots that they had was it's like they owned a third of the plantations in Jamaica in the end or something like that. You hear all the statistics about, the influence they had and the presence that they had, because I think it was 1 in 5 slave ships that weren't necessarily only Scottish. These were, all slave ships. And these were coming from all sorts of different countries. So, even on the Portuguese slave ship, Scottish captain, you know what I mean? So they were very industrious and very, very successful in their sort of enterprise within the slave trade. Not necessarily me bigging them up. This is me just sort of speaking facts,
Yeah. One thing that I was shocked about was in the part of the video when they talk about how slavery helped Scottish wealth and Scottish income and stuff like that. It was when they talked about New Lanark or Lanark. And Lanark is like a really big topic in Scottish education, and you learn it in school. You go to the Lanark mills, you go down to the town, and it's like a big thing. And I remember going down when I was younger, and I remember the first thing I was like, it crossed my mind because they just talked about how the cotton and they put it through the mills and stuff. And the first thing that I thought was, Scotland's not hot enough to grow cotton. And as a young child, I was like, obviously my parents had told me about things like go on and like African history stuff, but even at the age of probably like 8 or 9, I knew that Scotland was too cold to grow cotton, and I knew that wasn't right. So I was just like, even then I questioned them. I was like, but how is there cotton here? And they were like, it's Scottish cotton. It's Scottish materials, it's whatever, it comes from our land. And now looking back, when I've watched this tape and it said, oh, well, actually, the cotton was shipped from Jamaica and then they put it through the mills. So it's like, well, that's another lie that we've had for education. It's like a domino effect of constant lies that the Scots have had within our education system, not trying to say anything.
Yeah, and I think that if you look at the impact of that, you've got kind of two sides to it because, and I think this might be something you might want to talk about, on another episode. But, what impact does miseducation have on the general public with respect to, your non-blacks and black people as well? So education, just as simple as, producing cotton, it kind of gives this misperception. Number one, it obviously doesn't paint them as the terrible people that they were when they were involved in the slave trade. But it also gives the conception that that these Europeans are able to do such amazing things. They were able to do so much, and they are so great, But actually, you don't realize that greatness is actually off the back of violation of human rights, not that that existed at the time, but also off the hard work of other people. And so I think that miseducation is very important, and I think it's one of the reasons that some our community down into a way of thinking that really doesn't really allow us to actually push forward and achieve our best. So but there's just so many different levels to that deception. They're telling you blatant lies. They are.
Yeah, and I hope that for the future children that are going to learn about the Lanark Mills and they're going to go there, I hope now that the education system tells them. Because if anything, like if my son has to go there, I'm going to tell him like, yo, that was built off slaves. Like the slaves took the cotton. Before you go to that school trip, I'm going to tell him myself if the schools don't do it. Because it is an important part to it. Because once I left that place as a child, we got told that, oh, this is where Scottish cashmere comes from, and this is where Scottish whatever comes from, and it was emphasis on Scottish cotton and Scottish materials and things like that. So I think it's one of those things as a parent now, I'm very much like, I want my child to get the correct education. If he doesn't, I will go to that school trip and be like, teacher, by the way, just saying. So I just really hope for that the future generations that they do start exposing themselves, and it needs to be known. Like it does need to be known.
But to answer your question though, whose responsibility is because I've got a big thing, and my general sort of views on moving us forward are probably not necessarily as mainstream as everybody else, and my big thing is accountability. Who is it really to educate us? Is it really the state? After all the things that they've done, right? We know what they've done. Why are we relying on them to educate us? Why
it's not even that, like,
and all this kind of stuff? Why can you not go out, find out this information yourself? That's really what independence is all about, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think the one problem I have with that is the fact of, if that's the case and we have to teach our children ourselves, it's only going to be the kids of color that learn, or the parents that, if they have like allied parents, or if there's a white parent that's an ally and they've taught themselves and they want to teach the kids, it's not going to be widespread. Whereas, like you said, with the accountability side, it should be widespread, and it should be like, okay, so obviously now, no, it's not. I'm not like it's not racist, but yes, it's still racism still exists and whatever. But it's such a part of, if Scotland has been made this great place and we've built all these buildings and we've added so much to their economy and things like that, they should teach that slavery was the reason for that, or like the reasons as to why and why there was involvement, because it is just one-sided.
I think it's worth lobbying for, but I'm just a bit of a pessimist, and I just think, why would they? Why would they teach us? They don't have to. This is not for their benefit. And I also think at the same time, why can we not educate ourselves? And I understand that you're right. We should mainly educate each other, whereas if it was taught in schools, it would educate us, and it would educate the Scottish people, the indigenous Scottish people, and they have just as much of a right to know the real history, as we do. Mm-hmm. But I think at the same time, especially if we start to get our act together socially and economically, what's stopping us having our own schools? Last time I checked, private schools were allowed. Why can't we build our own schools and our own curriculum? It doesn't even mean that white people can't turn up. But once we start to take accountability for educating ourselves, we have that, again, is a bigger step towards independence, as far as I'm concerned.
But even with that, it then brings the problem of, is that not just introducing segregation again? Because it could potentially go down that one route, that there is the black schools and the white schools. And yeah, there's that thing. I completely see where you're coming from, and I understand it in the sense of that you get like the Arabic schools that are led from the mosque, and they teach the kids Arabic and stuff, and they have their own examination boards, and they can then qualify with like the same A levels that are higher and standard grades and stuff. But I think what society fears is, by doing that, it could then lead back to Jim Crow life and segregation, and there's going to be like the coloured and da 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 da.
Well, I see what you're saying. I mean, first of all, I couldn't give a damn what society thinks, because society is what, is partly contributed towards us being in the situation we're in. Society has done very little towards helping us achieve the independence, the freedom, and the true, genuine equality that we need. So I couldn't give a damn what they think. As for what you're saying about, different ethnic groups having their schools, that's a very good point. If they can have their schools and no one complains, why can't we have our schools without anybody else complaining? Third point is, most of these schools are quote unquote white schools, and we can go there. So if we set up a black owned school, who's saying that white people can't come in? Maybe they want to learn this too. You know, like we're not going to sit teaching the white people are terrible and that, you know, that's not what this is about. This is about giving people the real true education, people who actually want the truth. They want to find out, you know, where that cotton actually came from and not be lied to.
Mm.
You know, a false portrayal of Scotland's history, you know.
I suppose it's a case of like seeing if like someone did choose to do that. I think it would be how would they get that through the governing board or the education board, and how would they get that passed without making it look like, oh, we just want to be within ourselves and keep ourselves to ourselves and things like that. Because that's the way that they could potentially portray it, and they could make it out being like, oh well, if you want to do that, go back to your country. If you want to do that, go back to where.
Why would they do that? That's the key question. Why would they do a thing like that?
Mm.
Do they not want us to be properly educated? You know what I mean? If they know that we're not doing it like that, and they know their intentions are good, and every other ethnic group can have their schools, why would someone try and block it if they're actually really trying to help us get the equality we need? You know, these are questions that, but the question is we don't know this until we actually go for it. And you know, my view of empowerment and accountability and actually taking control of your own destiny, I'm a big believer that on a social level, on an economic level, on an education level, we have to really start taking accountability for our own freedom instead of just keep asking for it. You know, we have to remember that slaves were, you know, African slaves were slaves for centuries, such a long time. If someone's not going to grow a conscience after X amount of 100 years, why do you expect them to do it now? You know what I mean? And if they
But then
will,
maybe that's what is happening, that the conscience is growing, because obviously slavery ended like 400 odd years ago now, but it's been a 400-year oppression of slavery's over, but there's still that oppression within the black community and the oppression of black people living globally. So I think there's now the next stage of, even if we do that, like obviously just all the uproar that's going on and like the movements that are going on, I think now it's at a point of we're tired of living this same level of racism. So I think we'll probably see in the next 100 years, the next whatever years, there'll be a different level of, yes, we've made these achievements so far and everything has changed, but will there be a new wave of protest, and will there be a new wave of like trying to get more equality and more things like that?
I 100% agree, but I just think that, I guess what I'm saying is just like, the whole thing about, you know, do something for us, but what are you going to do for yourself? Like, if I go and ask anybody for help, a lot of times they're not going to want to help me unless they see that I'm trying to help myself. But then look at, say, for example, like, you know, Kanye West, right? So, you know, I don't know that about his situation in that much detail, but, you know, he was fighting for ages to get deals in the fashion industry. And he was really, really struggling because of what he felt was racist. So all he did is he went and created his own thing. And look at the situation we have now.
Yeah,
and, you know, exactly. And I'm not necessarily somebody who believes that celebrities should be our icons and our gold standard for any kind of stature or achievement is just celebrities, right? I think that's actually something that's not good for us. But there are certain things that you can pick out, and I would say that's an example of inspiration. And he tried to complain, he tried to lobby, it wasn't working. He went and did his own thing, you know? And I just think that if more of us had that mindset and we actually were willing to work together and support each other, I think with the synergy that went along with that, I think we could do so much in any kind of area that we're fighting for.
Do you know what like really messes me up with the whole Kanye situation is the fact that he got, so when obviously he raised his concerns about how he was getting rejected with his fashion side just due to race attention to it, but then once he started to put in Trump, it was like how, like all this kind of stuff, and it was like the backlash of like, that's his political opinion, but this is actually his career. And when he's trying to bet his career or whatever, you guys just don't want to listen to his complaints and don't want to listen to his struggles and stuff like that. But then now he's got his own opinion on political sides. It's like, oh no, you're not a true black person, or you're not true to your culture and your fans and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I don't know so much about, but I guess a large part of that would be because I think in America, there's a very strong link between the left and the Democrats, and you know the black people. So the black people don't vote. If they do vote, they vote Democrat. You know, and to see a black person with a Republican, it's like, what are you doing there? Irrespective of whether you know that's the right thing for you. And to give a sort of parallel, maybe a UK parallel, and this is something that a friend told me. He said that, you know, I actually know this myself. Like a lot of certainly the Caribbean community, we were again very like sort of linked to the Labour Party and things like that. Never vote Conservative, even in my house. You know, I grew up I was a kid in the Maggie Thatcher era. You know, she wasn't. I don't know what she was like. People thought of her in Scotland, but down here, You know,
She's
like,
hated down like up here, and she's manufactures it's a touchy subject.
she shut down all the sort of in the industrial companies, didn't she, or something like that, right? Did she shut down a coal
I
mine or something?
I think yeah, she kind of like shut down a lot of the factories in the in industries that we had in Scotland. I don't know. I didn't when we did like history. I didn't choose that manufacturer because I was trying to do the slavery shit. So I didn't actually
Of
do
course.
no manufacturer. But yeah, I just know there's that big divide, and even when she died, there was like so much celebration here. And I was like, this is deep. Like, okay.
I think she was quite instrumental in the move from sort of that industrial economy into a service economy. But where I was going is that, again, we had that, with black people, I think we had that very strong link with the Labour Party, and the Labour Party was very much sort of very linked to things like benefits and very much more about sort of equality and equality of outcomes specifically, where they would sort of want everybody earning roughly the same amount. And this isn't me necessarily trying to say that think the Conservatives are great or anything, but they were much more about sort of low taxes for businesses and not much benefits, and really kind of incentivize people to go out and work for things. And if you had, say, the Asian sort of Indian community compared to the black community in the UK,
Mm-hmm.
they came around the same time, if not maybe even after the Windrush generation, and they've been able to move themselves much, much further up the social chain than black people have, systemically on average.
Yeah.
Could be attributed towards us being so dependent on the left and so dependent on benefits, and again, that accountability, wanting somebody else to give us something rather than wanting to be incentivized towards going out and building something. And I think there's a similar kind of thing out there in America. If you're black and you're a conservative here, I think you're kind of seen as a sellout. And I think if you're black and you're a Republican in America, I think it's the same thing.
And it's funny that you touched on the Asian thing. Like in Scotland, Asians now have their own tartan. So there's a Sing tartan for the Asian community, and they've now developed their own because tartan's like a clansmanship, and it's one of those like traditional Scottish names. Much probably like yourself, it's probably one for your name. Everyone has their own colours and the way the print works and stuff like that. But now there's a Sing tartan, and I'm sure that's been like in the past 10 years that it's developed, and it's like just look at how much presence they have within Scotland and UK economy and stuff. They've managed to get themselves a clan. Like if I had one for my surname, I'd be like, oh, I've done bits. Like,
Must be a link towards the colonization of that part of the world as well, Scotland.
mhm. I
Obviously
know
not.
that the link was that in Asia they would go. So the UK was going to Asia to gain spices and herbs and stuff like that, and like silks and things. So they kind of did trades in through that. And then, but then there's also I think colonization goes really far down because obviously like yourself, you guys have like the way that Caribbean food is kind of linked to the West Indies and Indian food and stuff like that. And like there's places within Africa where our recipes are very Asian like and they're very similar. So you can just see how the world has kind of gone to different places and it's kind of been an effect based on who was first.
Yeah, they go around. They go around.
Yeah, their man travels.
Yeah.
um,
It is. Voyages.
yeah. Right, let's talk about the African. Let me just take time. So the last topic I wanted to touch on was the African Jamaican divide, and I don't know if many people really know that this goes on in the UK or this went on in the UK. It used to be a thing, but I think, as we were saying, it kind of comes from the fact that Jamaican people and Caribbean people were here before we were and things like that. But firstly, I wanted to ask you, do you identify as Caribbean, African, or Pan African, and why?
Very good question. 100% Pan African. Um, I feel like I kind of always had that view as a kid, but I didn't really know much of the difference. I just saw a black person as like same as me kind of thing. You know what I mean? But then again, in more recent years, when I kind of started to build my knowledge about this kind of stuff, definitely Pan African. Yes, there's a difference in culture, but I don't really see a divide and a difference between us. Only superficial divide.
And what makes you identify with being Pan African? What's the reasons for that? Like what? Yeah, where did that come about? What made you kind of think and lead yourself to that identity?
I just feel like for a start, genetically, what's the difference? There's definitely going to be mixing, and I imagine that on average, the Caribbean genes are probably going to be a bit more watered down than somebody who's come directly from Africa. but it doesn't mean that there wasn't mixing going on on the motherland as well. Do you know what I mean?
Mm.
I think basically, genetically, I don't believe that there will be a massive, massive difference between us, which for a
Yeah.
start, as far as I'm concerned, ethnically, as far as I'm concerned, the same. And I still feel like culturally there is a link. And then I think also, when you look at the world we live in, are you and I going to be treated much differently because I'm Caribbean and you're not?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not.
Probably not. At the end of the day, we're black, so that's all it is.
If you were
I think
you wouldn't even know the difference. Until you spoke or what you're wearing, you wouldn't even know the difference. I'm sure if I was putting traditional African clothing somewhere in Africa, until I open my mouth, no one's even going to know the difference.
true. A lot of times, actually, when I was younger, I think because where I'm from is such a small country in Africa anyway, so no one really would ever guess that was where I'm from. But I would either get a mix of like Southern African guesses or it'd be Caribbean, and they would just think, oh, you're probably Jamaican or something. I'm like, no, Central Africa. Like, and it's one of those things that I think just because you're black, no one really, unless you're from Africa or from the Caribbean, you can notice the small differences in our features and stuff like that. But I think from the outside looking in, we're all just one. We're one race anyway, and we're one culture. But I do agree with the whole Caribbean people being Pan African because the way I see it is that you guys were essentially taken from our land, and our motherland is your motherland, and we all started off in that one place, but Caribbeans only got situated because of them being taken for slavery. And it's one of those things, if you look into it, you will see that the indigenous people of the Caribbeans were lighter skinned and then they weren't so much white, but they were like kind of like what the Europeans are. And like when you look at like Spain and Greece and stuff like that. So they were like very fair skinned. And the only reason that black people started getting populated there was that they were the leftover slaves, or like if there was plantations in the Caribbean, they lived on those plantations. But when they were getting sold, when they landed, if you had like say if you were damaged or you had broken bones or they couldn't sell you because of like such and such, they weren't taking you back. Like they weren't trying to make that journey twice. They were just leaving you there. So I think that's where
I didn't
my
even know.
view of it comes. Or did you not?
No, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I learned that when I was in college. But yeah, that's when I learned that. That was one of the things that made me think. Essentially, we are all African. Because I used to think like, no, there's Caribbeans and there's us. But learning that made me realize like, no, we all have the same motherland and we all have the same culture, essentially.
Yeah, so well, I think culturally there's differences, definitely. Because you know what I mean? I mean, culturally, raised completely different, or certainly quite different to how I imagine, certainly a lot of my African friends were raised. But then actually, you'd be surprised by the similarities, really. You know what I mean?
Do you think that? Do you think that because you're third generation, is it third or second?
I can't remember what you class it. You probably say, I'd say third generation. If my grandparents were first generation and my parents were second, then that would make it third, wouldn't
Yeah, you're third. So have you noticed any difference between you being third generation and how you were brought up compared to your friends that say like me, I'm first generation. So like have you noticed any differences in like your peer groups and stuff?
it? Very good question. That is a very good question.
You're actually thinking on it, you know.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking about that. That is a very good question. Because it's very obvious if I was just talking about Caribbean people whose parents were born there, I'll start by saying I got beaten probably a lot less than they did. But,
Mm-hmm.
or I don't know. I couldn't answer that question. I don't know. I think one of the very obvious consequences would be that they've got closer link back home. They'll have a closer link with their family. There's a bigger gap.
Mm-hmm.
My parents weren't even
Yeah,
born here, so I don't know much of my family out in Jamaica. Whereas,
yeah,
I think if your parents were born there, then you're going to have more of a link, visit them more often, and be a bit more sort of in touch with your culture there. So I would probably say the only thing I can think of is that African family would have a closer link to their family back home than I, as a third generation Jamaican, have. My family back there probably don't even know I exist.
yeah. Um, do you speak Patois? And do you think there's links to Patois and Pidgin that's spoken in West Africa?
In theory, you'd think there has to be. Well, I
Just
speak
explain
it
Patois,
now.
actually. Quickly explain what Patois is, because people won't know what it is.
It's a dialect, but as far as I'm concerned, for me, it's an accent. In that I can understand what they're saying. They can obviously understand what I'm saying, because they can understand English.
Mm.
But if you don't speak to a lot of people with that accent or with that dialect, then you won't really understand what they're saying. And for some people, especially if someone's got a really thick accent, it can sometimes sound like another language. Which is what I understand. Pidgin English is a similar kind of thing, but I imagine it's derived from some tribal African languages of the sort of more prominent countries that had to
Mhm.
produce slaves that went there, mixed with English. I'm sure that's pretty much what it is.
Yeah, because that's the big tie is the fact that pidgin is most commonly spoken in the places like Ghana, Sierra Leone, and along the west coastline. So that's
Mm.
why I probably like that's why I asked the question because it is pidgin is the African version of patois. It's broken English and it's a dialect that comes from a mix of other local languages, but mainly English is very dominant in it. And even like you said, when the accent's thick, you might not understand it, but when it's quite Western, if they've been in the Western world or it's quite Westernized, then you can start to understand it. Because even when I meet like Jamaicans that have like proper live a Jamaican, grow up, whatever, I'm like, what? Like, what did you say? Like, I can't understand it. But it's the same as like when I speak to people from West Africa and they've got like a really thick accent. I think pidgin's easier because I'm used to the African accent and I've grown up around it, so I think that's easier for me. But yeah, but I feel like a lot of people do confuse patois with it being an actual language instead of a dialect.
You don't have pigeon in East Africa?
No, it's
Ah,
only in the West.
okay. Only in the West. Okay, interesting. Well, yeah, I
So
think
in
that
the
makes a lot.
East, our local language is Swahili.
Swahili. I thought Swahili
Yeah,
was
so
from the
that's like
South.
the common language.
That's
No,
the
the
common language.
South. I actually don't know what the common language is in the South because the South have a lot of languages, and then you get South Africa, which has like loads of tribal languages. So I don't know what their
Mm.
common language would be, but I know that in the South, no, not in the South, in the East, our common language is Swahili, and that kind of comes from um the North, and it's like a it's comes from Arabic, I think. Don't quote me on that, but I know it kind of in my family. I know that if you're Muslim, like a Muslim side of the family, they speak Swahili because they're Muslim. So that's how it kind of generates through.
But these far places like Egypt and Jordan, Libya, they wouldn't be too far away from there, right? So
Yeah,
that they
so
would be
yeah,
Arabic.
the river that is in my country connects to the Nile.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's a very, very like close link. And then you go to Egypt and then you get I'm sure it's Somalia and like all those
Mm.
countries and Ethiopia and stuff, and then you go right into like East Central Africa. So that's it's kind of like traveled down. But I don't know what then from Swahili, I don't know how that went down to South and Southern Africa. I don't know what their common language is. But yeah, it's a very common thing that in certain areas of Africa we have a common communal language that we can speak to other people in other countries. So I think that's probably where Patois and Pidgin are very correlated, and I think that's why there's a strong connection of it's the West Coast and you guys came from the West Coast. Oh, we've actually
But
got like 2 minutes. Hmm?
sorry,
No,
I
I've
was
just got a
gonna.
notification that says we've got 2 minutes remaining, so we'll probably wrap it up here really quickly. All right. Yeah, we will. But yeah, this is actually quite educational. We'll probably get you on for another episode because I feel there's loads to talk
Yeah,
to with the
that'd
whole
be good.
Caribbean and stuff like that. So thank you for coming
Yeah,
and let everyone know where they can find you on socials and Smoky Settings and stuff like that.
yeah. So yeah, underscore Smokey Settings underscore, which is our tag. Follow us for if you're sort of interested in sort of urban music, French speaking, or from the UK. And follow us. We've got some clothing coming out as well, some t-shirts. We'll be providing a link for merchandise, and yeah, just stay tuned for events and everything along those lines.
Yeah, you can also get your face mask from them. You can get the same one that I had at the protest. So yeah, they do face masks protecting people in these times, which is good.
Yeah,
Thank you guys for
exactly.
coming on
You're
today.
welcome,
It was really
and
good.
yeah, stay in touch.
I will do. For everyone watching it, I'm gonna link the research video that we used because it was very educational. It's 25 minutes long, but it actually is worth the 25 minutes of watching it. And if you have any questions to pass back to me and Hedley, then just let us know and I'll put your socials on for it. And that should be good. Right. See you soon.
Okay,
Bye.
yeah, bye.